Okay, so we are live. So we'll start with the first video. Okay, so can you guys see this screen, the video?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Ecological communities consist of all the interacting species populations within an ecosystem. Most species populations within an established community, such as the African savanna, have interacted with one another over a long period of time. The interactions that occur between populations in a community fall into three major categories. Competition, in which populations compete for limited resources. Predation, in which organisms of one species kill and eat those of another. And symbiosis, in which two species populations live together in close association with one another to the selection of the species populations involved. Thus, the populations of a given biological community are intertwined with one another in an intricate coevolutionary process. However, these self-sustaining, balanced communities develop through gradual changes occurring over long periods of time. During these periods of change, one type of community gives way to another until a balanced, self-sustaining community is established. For example, none of the Earth's majestic forests originally began as forests of huge trees. Rather, the land they now cover was initially inhabited by lichen, mosses, grasses, and low-growing shrubs. It was only after a long period of time that the established forest ecosystems we see today were formed. The process by which ecosystems slowly change into balanced, self-sustaining communities is called succession. Let's now take a closer look at the selective forces of competition, predation, and symbiosis, as well as how self-sustaining communities are created through succession. Each species in a community occupies a unique ecological niche that encompasses all aspects of that species' way of life. The concept of the ecological niche not only includes a species' physical home or habitat, but also its food requirements, behavior, and predators, or what might be called the species' role or occupation within its ecosystem. In addition, a species' niche includes all the physical environmental factors necessary for its survival, such as the range of temperatures under which members of the species can survive, the amount of water they require, and in the case of plants, the pH of the soil they can inhabit, the type of soil nutrients required, and the degree of shade that can be tolerated. Although no two species can ever occupy exactly the same ecological niche for a sustained period of time, the niches of different species often overlap one another. The results of overlapping niches is competition.
Okay, so this particular video in a short 3-minute span essentially talked about a large number of concepts: competition, predation, ecosystems changing over time, niche, etc., etc. Niche is also called niche, okay, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So these 4 or 5 concepts, these are the ones that we are going to deal with over the next 3 to 4 topics. Okay, so now I'll take you guys to the PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint, people?
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you. So we'll start with the first kind of interaction, which is competition. And in terms of this whole picture, So remember, earlier we were here, now we are essentially moving up one step, and we are going into all those interactions which form the community. Okay, so from population ecology we are going into community ecology. So competition is something that has been studied in biology for a very long time. Thinking in terms of competition was something which was instrumental for Darwin in figuring out his theory of evolution through natural selection. Although the theory today is far beyond competition, but when he was thinking, the core of it, competition played a very big role in it. Now, people have been working on competition for quite some time, the last 130 years or so. And some of the earliest experiments on this were due to a guy called A.G. Tansley, who was working on grasses, and this Russian microbiologist, G.F. Gause. So we'll come back to Gause's work again and again in different contexts. So what I'm presenting over here is Gause's work on competition, and he was working with paramecium. So if you guys remember, in the first year you might have seen paramecium in the pond ecosystem practical that you did. So if you remember, these are very small microscopic animals that look like slippers, and therefore they are called slipper animalcule and so on. So he took two species, Gause took two species of paramecium, Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum. And first he grew them separately. And when he grew them separately, he found that both dynamics give a very nice S-shaped curve, the kind that you expect out of the continuous logistic model. So you can easily estimate a R and a K from these things. However, when he grew them in mixed cultures, one of those species, and in this case it was Paramecium caudatum, always went to extinction after some time, and another species, the Paramecium aurelia here, that always used to be the one left. Okay, so this experiment is one of the earliest or one of the most influential experiments in community ecology. And other people, for example Tansley that I mentioned, they also ended up finding pretty much the same thing. Whenever you take two species, closely related species, and you make them live in the same area, one of them would always wipe out the other. And that led Gause to give what is known as Gause's principle of competitive exclusion, which was what was also mentioned in the video, which is that no two species with the same niche can coexist. Now, this principle has been pretty influential in the field of ecology. And again, this is one of those null principles. Well, not exactly null principle, because this actually happens many a times. But many a times the subject ends up proceeding by trying to understand why is it that two species are able to coexist even though their niches look like to be completely overlapping. So people kept on working on this, and one major experiment or set of studies on this was due to this man called David Tillman. Now this is a very important name in ecology. He is the most cited ecologist amongst all ecologists. Okay, and that's some credit. So David Tillman was working with diatoms. Again, you might have seen diatoms last year. So you know that these diatoms, these are again microscopic organisms, and they have siliceous shells. Okay, so they have exoskeletons, they have an outer covering, and that is made of silica. So he took two species, Asтерionella and Cynedra, and what he saw was that when you left them alone, both of them again had a very similar monotonic approach to equilibrium kind of a growth. And in the process, these guys were using up the silica that was there in the environment. So they reduced the level of silica. Okay. Now, interestingly, when you mix them, so these are two replicates of the same experiment. When you mix them, without fail, this guy, Cynedra, that drives the other guy to extinction. And the mechanism through which this happens is the amount of silica. So both of them need some amount of silica to sustain in the culture. However, turns out that these guys, the Cynedras, they can live at a much lower level of silica compared to the Asterionella. Therefore, when these guys are alone, they eat up the silica, they use up all the silica. It goes to this level, which is much higher than this level, where the Cynedra will drive the silica level to. And therefore, when you mix the two, the amount of silica is not enough for these guys, but sufficient for these guys. Therefore, they end up surviving. So Tillman slightly extended this rule, and he called it the R star rule of competition. And what he said was that when two or more species are limited by the same resource, then the species that can maintain a positive per capita growth rate at the lowest resource level will end up excluding all the other species, which basically means the ones which can live with the minimum amount of resource will win, everybody else will lose out. Okay. So that brings us to a definition of competition. I mean, we have been saying all these things without really defining what competition is. Yeah, somebody wants to ask something?
One question. Is this assuming that the two species are going to grow at the same growth rate and the same generation time?
Not at all.
No assumptions.
No such things. If you look at these things, the growth rates are different, right? Again, look at these things.
Right.
The growth rates are slightly different. Okay, the Ks are very different actually. So there is no such assumption. The only point is that when you reach your carrying capacity or whatever the stable population size, at that point, what is the level of resource that you need? If you can sustain yourself at a low level resource, then you win.
So as per this principle, even if a particular species has a generational time scale that's much longer than another one, it's growing much more slowly.
Yes,
it can still win out.
Yes. And you can already see problems with your R and K selection, right? R selection, K selection. Yeah, that is why I had said R selection, K selection needs to be taken with lots of buckets of salt. Anyway, so the question is, what is competition? Now, all of us have some kind of an intuitive idea about what competition is, right? So how would you guys define competition? I have already given you guys the main tenets of the definition. Can somebody put it in words? Okay, people, competition is something that you guys have been facing since what, class 7th, 8th, or maybe even earlier, right? What is competition?
It's like an effect where there's a limited supply of some resource and multiple organisms compete. I'm using compete in competition. Multiple organisms want to use that resource, and due to the limited nature, the organisms that are better able to exploit that resource will do better than the others.
Now, what is do better?
More survival over the long term, I'd say.
Yeah, kind of close. And does the resource have to be limiting?
Not necessarily. I think it can be limited at a given time, I suppose. Like, suppose there's like an unlimited amount of, say, some nutrients, but flows in at a constant rate into the system or whatever. I guess it depends on what you define your system as.
For any given system, along any axis, does the resource have to be limiting? Or at least some axis is limiting resource necessary condition?
I don't think so. Not really.
Correct. So limiting resource cannot be a necessary condition for competition. It is most often associated with it, but doesn't have to be a defining feature. And can you tell me why that is so?
Sir, I think even if there is an infinite amount of resource, the species which constitute the ecosystem will still fight each other for the resources, right?
No. The point is not necessarily, right? They may or they may not. The question is,
Uh,
how will you use that understanding to define competition?
I think it
because
could
they have a different inherent ability to pick up that resource. Like even if it is unlimited, different individuals perform differently because of their inherent ability.
I think what could be different is the quality of the resource. So, for example, if it's like um, birds looking for a nesting site or whatever, there'll be like
The
some
moment
really
you
good.
bring in quality, you are implicitly bringing in limiting factor. Because then what you are essentially saying is that the best quality resource is the one which is limited in amount, right?
No, I mean,
The existence of one
like,
species hampers the other species' ability to take up that resource.
Exactly. So it is entirely possible that even if by itself there is no limitation in terms of the amount of the resource, one guy can end up cornering most of it. Okay, and thereby creating trouble for the other guys and thereby creating competition. So the limitingness of the
Excuse me, sir.
resource, the limitingness of the resource doesn't need to be a real limitation. It can be something that can be artificially created. Okay, Bolo?
No, so if there is no limitation for resources, then why would there be a negative influence between the two populations or two species?
This is not talking about two species necessarily. It can
No,
be
but
between any two
yeah,
individuals or anything, because suppose one of them ends up cornering the resource and thereby, suppose take the example of let's say a lion species. Okay, a lion population. One or two males have ended up cornering all the females, and now there are lots of males who don't have access to females, even though female number is not limiting.
uh, but the female number is limited, right, sir, in this context?
That's what I'm saying. The number by itself is not limited.
Oh, okay, okay.
Some of them end up cornering the resource, and therefore it becomes limited.
Okay, sir. Yeah,
Okay,
I get it. Yeah.
Right. So any use or defense of a resource by one individual that reduces the availability of the resource to other individuals. So this is one way of looking at it. And another way of looking at it is, okay, here they are explicitly using the term limited resource, but as we discussed, the resource doesn't necessarily need to be limited. But essentially the second point is this one, that there has to be a detriment of one party or both parties. Okay, so this is an interesting or important feature in competition. If two species or populations or individuals are interacting in such a way that there is no negative effect on either or both, then you can't say that competition is happening. So competition in some sense is also defined in terms of the effect that it ends up causing. And if that effect is not negative, not competition. So based on, in biology, based on who's competing, you can roughly divide competition into two types: intraspecific, where competition is happening between members of the same species, and interspecific, when competition is happening between members of different species. So the density dependent growth that we studied, that is an example of intraspecific competition, which is ending up affecting the growth rate of the population, and actually it's also ending up reducing the growth rate of individuals as well, which is kind of getting reflected as the reduction in the population growth rate. Okay, this is something that we have already discussed. Another important way in which intraspecific competition happens is through competition for mates. Now, this is something that we traditionally discuss when we discuss the topic of sexual selection. However, for the sake of this, just to keep you guys interested, I'm going to show you guys one quick video about sexual selection, and then we'll get back to the topic of interspecific competition. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. And yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I've ended up presenting the wrong thing. Just 1 second. Yeah. So can you see the screen now? People?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
These Grant's gazelles are also measuring each other up and trying to decide whether to risk a dangerous duel or not. Competing by brute force is one technique adopted by males, but there's another way, by being glamorous. Threatening rivals with striking plumage is the domain of birds. These are mandarin drakes, beautiful, but displaying for sexual dominance. Showing off as a way of winning a power struggle can be seen in black grouse, a Swedish dawn. Before the hens appear, the cockbirds declare choral warfare and challenge each other to ritualized fights. Flashing feathers is no soft option to armed combat. The rivalry between these males is just as serious as it is among those which fight. The best performer reaps his reward by mating with the majority of the hens. In Costa Rica lives one of the natural world's greatest glamour boys, the red-capped manakin. They're born showmen, designed to dazzle, with each trying to outshine the others with their brilliant plumage, fancy footwork, and startling wing snap. Egged on by the presence of a female, the males intensify their acts. When really worked up, they reveal their eye-catching trousers. Although driven by sex, this is also a display of aggression, warning rival males to keep their distance. There are 11 males in this jungle theater, all vying with each other to become the most desirable performer.
okay. So, as I said, we are going to get back to this topic when we do sexual selection, but before that we'll have to take care of normal selection and so on and so forth. So let's get to interspecific competition. So as I said, two populations of different species competing with each other for the same limiting resource. If they are not affecting each other, then there is no competition that is supposed to be happening. Now, there are two features of interspecific competition that you need to keep in mind. One is that it's a non-trophic interaction, which means that no one is eating anyone. Okay, and when one species ends up eating another species, then it becomes predation, or one of its several variants of predation. And when you say affect each other, what are you thinking in terms of? Okay, so the affecting each other is typically in terms of either reduced population growth rate or equilibrium number, the equivalent of K, or both, in either both populations or at least one population. Now, please remember that the effect on the two populations sometimes is symmetric, many a times it's not symmetric. Okay, so there is nothing to say that both of them are equally affected by the competition or competitive interaction. So how does one think about the competitive interaction? So for that, we are going to try and make a quick model of it. Okay, let me get out of this. Okay, and let me go here. Okay. So can you guys see the whiteboard, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sir.
Okay, fine. So let's assume that we have two species, 1 and 2. Okay, and let's also assume that to begin with, in the absence of each other, on their own, each one of them is following a simple one-dimensional continuous logistic model. So if you look at the first species, then the dynamics of the first species, dn1 dt, is equal to r1 n1 k1. So it is 1 minus n by k, right? So I'm writing it as k minus n by k. K1 minus n1 by k1, correct? Now suppose to this population I introduce one individual of species 2. Okay, now this individual is going to have some effect on the growth rate of the population of species 1. Now it's easiest to think of it in terms of resources. So suppose when they are having an effect, then if the effect of adding one individual of species 2 is exactly the same as adding one individual of species 1, then basically species 1 and species 2 are completely equivalent of each other. Then all you need to do is to increase this n1 by 1, correct? But typically that will not happen. So typically you need to convert the one individual of species 1, one individual of species 2 into the corresponding number of individuals of species 1, right? So the thing that does this conversion, that is what is known as the interspecific competition coefficient. Interspecific competition coefficient, and is typically denoted by alpha 1, 2. So the way this is to be read is the effect of one individual of species 2 on the growth rate of species 1. Okay, now this was about one individual. Now suppose I have n2 individuals of species 2, then all I have to do is to multiply this by n2, the number of individuals of species 2. Now this thing is now all the individuals converted into corresponding number of individuals of species 1. Therefore basically this just gets subtracted from this, correct? K remains the same. So overall this is what becomes the equation for the first species. Similarly, dn2 dt is equal to R2n2 K2 minus N2 minus, now it's the other way around, alpha 2 1, effect of one individual of species 1 on the growth rate of species 2 multiplied by N1. The whole thing gets divided by K2. This thing over here, this system of coupled equations is what is known as the Lotka-Volterra competition equation. Okay, named after Alfred Lotka and Vito Volterra. So the guy who first came up with this formulation was actually Alfred Lotka, but his work was kind of ignored. Then after a few years, Vito Volterra published a paper in which he essentially came up with the same formulation. Then Alfred Lotka wrote a very complaining letter to Nature saying that thank you for doing this, but you know I have already done this piece of work. In response to which Vito Volterra publishes a very humble, almost an apologetic letter saying that Alfred Lotka is correct. This was an unintentional mistake. I had not seen his paper. So after that, this thing, since they came to it independently, therefore the names of both people were given to it, and this became the Lotka-Volterra competition equation. Okay, is this clear?
Sir, how do we know that K1 does not change? It remains the same.
See, in the context of this stuff, what are we doing? We are simply saying that we are converting N2 into corresponding number of N1 individuals, right?
Yes.
So K1 is not expected to change. How will K1 change? What is K1 saying? K1 is saying what is the number of individuals that is required of species 1 that is required for dn1 dt to go to 0.
Yes.
So that definition will not change, and for a given environment that parameter will also not change.
Okay.
You see it, right?
I'm not convinced.
And can you tell me why you are not convinced, or is this Arnab Goswami not convinced?
No. So suppose we have some species A and some species B. If species A was living by itself, it would have a certain value of K. But after introduction of species 2, K1 will change, right?
No, that there lies the whole point. You are considering K1, K2 separately. Okay,
Yeah.
you are considering the two species. But think about it. Here, what is this equation doing? This equation is converting all individuals of species 2 into corresponding individuals of species 1.
Okay.
Okay. So for a given, suppose only 100 individuals of species 1 could have been sustained. Okay. Now the actual number is say 30 or something. And now you have introduced some N2 which has been converted into the corresponding number of N1, which is say 10.
Okay. Okay.
So the factor 100 still remains the same, right?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
What you are saying is correct if we are going to consider both of them, as individual species. But the way this equation is operating, it is just converting them from one to the other. Okay, 1 is being converted into corresponding number of 2, and 2 is being converted into corresponding number of 1.
Okay. Yes. Got it.
And what is the equation? The thing that is describing it is the system of both equations taken together. Okay, that's the point.
Sir, is it then possible to relate alpha 1 2 and alpha 2 1? Shouldn't they be reciprocals or something like that?
Not exactly. If you only think in terms of resources, then yes, it kind of makes sense, right? If one is consuming 3 times the other is consuming 1/3 of the previous one. But the problem with competition is that competition is not always only in terms of resources. Competition can happen through many other factors. Okay, And if you think about those other factors, then it is not necessary that alpha 1 2 and alpha 2 1 will be simple reciprocals of each other.
The other factors?
They are changing the environment. Suppose one of them is, let's say putting out a lot of what is it called? Excretory material or allelopathic chemicals. So lots of plants, they end up putting out chemicals and they end up competing through those chemicals.
Okay.
So we haven't talked about mechanisms of competition, but resource is just one. There can be many more. Okay. Can I delete this because now we have to analyze these equations? Okay.
Sir, just a question. Shouldn't we add the alpha 1 2 times n2 to the n1 outside the bracket?
Why?
Because you said we are converting it to the other species.
Correct. So if you are converting it, then sorry, just 1 second. If you are converting it, then you over here write in this. See, so think about it this way: dn1 dt is equal to r1 n1 k1 minus n1 by k1. This is my original equation. Correct?
Yes.
In the absence of species 2. Now, what am I doing? I am adding some extra individuals of n2 and then converting them into n1, right? So basically, I am just increasing this factor, correct? I'm just increasing this factor, nothing else. So if you are increasing this factor, then this has to come inside the bracket, right? Because after all, the assumption is that the rest of the structure of the model remains the same. Okay, it's still a continuous logistic model where this is the realized growth rate and this is n. If you put it outside, then you are changing the structure of the model itself. So, and then you are having different assumptions about what the growth rates are like. Okay?
Sir, why didn't that n1 outside the bracket change to n1 minus alpha 1 to n2?
This one over here. Sorry. So you mean this one over here, right? Or correspondingly this one over here?
Yes, sir.
That is because remember what is this? R2, N2, and this is the factor. Okay, I'm sorry, I'll take that one. This multiplied by this is the realized growth rate, right? And this realized growth rate is to be multiplied with the actual population size to get the next generation. Correct?
Yes.
So this stuff over here, that will have an effect on the realized growth rate, but it cannot affect this one because after all, it's a different species, right?
So will it affect the next generation?
No. See, suppose you have, let's say one of them is a lion, the other is a tiger. The lion and tiger can reduce each other's growth rate, but the lion cannot produce tiger. The tiger cannot produce lion, right?
But they can reduce lions and tigers, right?
They can reduce the growth rate. The growth rate reduction is happening through this thing inside the bracket. Look at this thing. You have, this is your intrinsic growth rate. Correct? Yes. Per capita intrinsic growth rate. This is the reduction factor. So this multiplied by this gives you the realized growth rate, which then gets multiplied with the number of individuals in the previous generation. Correct?
Yes, sir. Okay.
So a different species can only contribute to the growth rate. They can't contribute to this part.
So here, okay. If we consider predation, then they can reduce, but here because it is
exactly, precisely. The actual number of individuals is not getting reduced. What is only getting reduced is the growth rate, which is why I started by saying it's a non-trophic interaction. Perfectly.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I'll quickly delete this whole thing, and we'll start with the analysis of the stuff. So let's just take the first one. dn1 dt is equal to r1 n1 k1 minus n1 minus alpha 1 to n2 by K1. Okay. Now, when you are trying to figure out the behavior of such equations, normally you try to see this at equilibrium, at which point you end up setting dn1 dt equal to 0, right? So when is equal to 0, then that thing can happen in 3 different ways. It can happen if R1 becomes equal to 0, or N1 becomes equal to 0, or this entire thing inside the bracket becomes equal to 0, right? Now, if R1 is 0, then that means that the growth rate of species 1 is 0, which basically means there is no species 1. When N1 is 0, that means that species 1 has gone to extinction. So both of these are trivial cases, trivial equilibriums, right? When essentially one species is not at all there, so obviously the other species will go to its K, and that's it. It happily coexists over there. So both of these are trivial things. We are not going to talk about that. We are more interested in what happens when this thing inside the bracket becomes equal to 0, which essentially means K1 minus N1 minus alpha 1 to N2 becomes equal to 0, which means alpha, N2 is equal to K1 by alpha 1 2 minus 1 by alpha 1 2 N1. Correct? Now, if you look at this, so remember this is for dn1 dt equal to 0. If you look at this, you can see that this is the equation for a straight line, correct? So if I take population 1 on x-axis, N1, population 2 on y-axis, N2, then given that this is a negative slope, all it will give me is a straight line like this, correct? What is going to be the intercept? This intercept over here is going to be K1 alpha 1 2, right? What is the value of this point? What is the value of this point? Can anybody figure out?
K1 alpha 1 2 over alpha 1 2. That is K1.
No. This point is K1.
K1.
Why?
Yes.
Because this is the point at which N2 has gone to 0, right? N2 has gone to 0, and dn1 dt has also gone to 0. Remember, this line is dn1 dt equal to 0, right? So when N2 has gone to 0, that means you have only one species left, which is species 1. And then what is the value at which species 1's dn dt becomes equal to 0? And that value is K1.
At its carrying capacity.
At its carrying capacity, which is K1, correct? So this point is K1. Now, think about what's going to happen at all the points over here and all the points over here. Now, again, remember this line is dn1 dt is equal to 0. So suppose we choose any point over here, okay, which is below this line. So you can think of this point as either going down from this point, which means reducing N2, or you can think of this point as going less from in this direction, which means reducing N1, or you can think of this point as reducing both N1 and N2, correct? Is this making sense, people?
Yes, sir.
Now, if that be the case, then look at this part over here. Remember, we are considering dn1 dt is equal to 0. Okay. So in this case, when dn1 dt is equal to 0 already, which is this line, and now you reduce n1, what will happen to dn1 dt? It will increase or decrease? Arey yaar. you have K1 minus N1 plus alpha 1 to N2. Okay, that's the stuff inside the bracket. So what I'm saying is, if you increase N1 over here, sorry, if you reduce N1 over here, then this part inside the bracket goes down, right? If this part inside the bracket goes down, then this entire thing dn1 dt becomes positive, correct? People?
Yes.
So if this becomes positive, then what happens to the population size of species 1?
That will increase.
It increases?
Yes.
Okay. By the same logic, if I am here on this side, okay, I have to either increase N1 or I have to increase N2 or I have to increase both, correct? Sorry, I have to either increase N1 or I have to increase N2 or I have to increase both. Those are the only three ways in which I can reach here. If I do that, again from here, what will that do to the equation, the dndt? That will end up reducing dndt. It becomes negative. And when dndt becomes negative, then what happens to the system? N1 decreases, correct?
Yeah.
So as long as the system, and remember the system is basically some combination of N1 and N2, as long as the system is below this line, this system is the population size of N1 is going to increase. As long as the system is above this line, the population size of N1 is going to decrease. Correct? Makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right? So this is for species 1, right? You can see that since these two equations are just symmetric to each other, for species 2, what am I going to get? I'm going to get sorry, just one sec. So for species 2, I'm going to get is equal to K2 by alpha 21 minus 1 by alpha 21 N2, correct? At equilibrium.
Yes.
So if I draw that, I have N2, N1 over here. I have species 2 over here. Again, I'm going to get a negative slope, right? K2 is going to be here, and K2 by alpha 21 is going to be here. And by the same logic that I discussed over here, I mean in this graph, by that same logic, as long as I'm below this graph, the population size of 2 will reduce, and when I'm other way around, when I'm below this graph, the population size of 2 will go up, and when I'm above this graph, the population size of 2 will go down. Correct?
Yes.
Agreed, people?
Yes.
Excellent. Can I erase this?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So now these lines that I drew, okay, these lines where dn1 dt is equal to 0 on a n1 n2 plane, these lines are known as zero growth isoclines. Okay, that's the technical term for them. Now if I have two such lines, one is for dn1 dt equal to 0, the other is for dn2 dt equal to 0, then I can arrange these two lines in 4 ways. Okay, 4 ways and not more than 4. So one is where these lines don't overlap. So this is the dn1 dt equal to 0 line, and similarly this is the dn2 dt equal to 0 line. Okay, I can do it the reverse. So now the N1 line is below and the N2 line is on top, correct? And I can make them intersect with each other. Now turns out that when it comes to this intersection itself, I can do this intersection in two different ways. Okay, one when the N1 line is above, the other when the N2 line is above. So let's assume that one case when this is the species 1 wala line and this is the species 2 wala line. So this is one case, and the other case is where this is the species 1 wala line and this is the species 2 wala line. Correct? You can satisfy yourself that these are the only 4 ways in which two straight lines with negative slopes can intersect with each other, or can be in relationship to each other. There can't be anything else. Okay. Now, what's the time? Oh, we are already at 3 o'clock. Okay, so we are going to stop this class over here. You guys have 1 week. So you can see that in each of these cases, these lines are dividing the graphs or the space into certain zones. So in these 2 cases, you have 3 zones. You have 3 zones, 1, 2, and 3. Here also you have 3 zones, 1, 2, and 3. In these cases, you have 4 zones, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in these cases, you have 4 zones, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Correct? So based on the insight that I shared with you guys, that above the population growth rate is going to go down, below the population growth rate is going to go up, what I want you guys to do is to try and figure out what is going to be the nature of the dynamics in these various zones, okay, for each one of these graphs. And then from that, try to intuit what is it that this model is trying to tell you. Now, for doing what I said, it's very easy. You don't need anything else. You just need these graphs. However, if you are more adventurous about it, I have given you the 2 equations, for the species 1 and species 2. Try to simulate those equations, and for different starting points, try to see what is going to be the behavior of the system, for these 4 cases. Okay? Is the thing clear what needs to be done? So you have 4 cases, 4 kind of parameter combinations, and for each one of them, try to figure out what is going to be the trajectory of the whole system. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I will stop presenting now, and we will also stop the recording at this point. Before I stop the recording, so today it turns out there is a very interesting talk that has suddenly been announced. So apparently some fellow has done some work by which they are challenging some very major tenets of evolutionary biology. And this is an Indian guy from some university in Sweden. So this has been announced, and I would actually like to attend that talk. So what I'll do is I will not office hour today, because this talk is most probably going to extend well into that office hour. I'll be hanging back for some time, and whosoever has it's at 4 o'clock, but if there is any indication, this is something that is probably going to stretch a bit. So which is why I'm excusing myself from the office hour. So it has come to you guys. It is in the it is in the in today's email. Okay, if you guys want, I can share it with you on the chat box.
Yeah.
So I will I'll just stop the recording now. So all those people who want to push off can push off, and on the remaining, if you hang around, I can talk to you guys. Samarth Parthi, are you around? Samarth? Samarth, is he there? Okay. can somebody send a message to Samarth saying that this has gone into his Google Drive and he needs to transfer the ownership to me? Okay. Wait.